There is a crucial distinction between foreseeing an empire's demise and truly comprehending the actual experience of its dissolution. Many mistakenly envision imperial collapse as a protracted, gradual erosion spanning decades, a gentle descent into insignificance. This is a fallacy. When empires crumble, their end is swift, often brutal, and those witnessing it are caught entirely unaware until it is irrevocably too late. Consider the year 410, Anno Domini. Rome, the eternal city, stood unconquered for 8 centuries, yet within 3 days it was engulfed in flames. Visigoths were pilfering its sacred temples, and citizens were desperately fleeing, clutching whatever meager possessions they could salvage. The empire that had dominated the known world for half a millennium was disintegrating in real time, and its inhabitants were in utter disbelief. Fast forward to June 1940. France was basking in triumphalism, possessing the most formidable military on the European continent. The Maginot Line was considered an impenetrable defense. By the close of that same month, German tanks were already parading through Paris. The government had absconded, and France had capitulated. A mere 4 weeks, that is the astonishingly short period it took for a global superpower to be reduced to a subordinate state. Then, in December 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev was still the leader of the Soviet Union, a superpower armed with 30,000 nuclear warheads. By December 26th, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. 900 days elapsed from the fall of the Berlin Wall to its complete dissolution. The sheer velocity of this collapse blindsided everyone. 3 distinct empires, 3 catastrophic collapses, each unfolding with greater rapidity than the last. And herein lies the most chilling revelation. Imperial collapse never transpires when anticipated. It manifests with sudden, violent finality. By the time individuals grasp the unfolding reality, the event is already concluded. This narrative chronicles the actual face of imperial collapse, not the drawn-out decline, but the final, catastrophic unraveling, the precise moment when prestige evaporates and harsh reality asserts itself. It delves into the 6 distinct phases of an empire's terminal stage and elucidates why every contemporary indicator suggests that America is hurtling towards this precipice with alarming speed, far exceeding what most are willing to acknowledge. Before we dissect the mechanics of collapse, it is imperative to grasp why it transpires with such alacrity. Why do seemingly robust empires disintegrate within months or even days? The answer lies in leverage and confidence. Empires are not sustained by tangible resources alone. Their true lifeblood is confidence. This encompasses confidence in the intrinsic value of the currency, assurance of military protection, faith in the government's capacity to uphold order, and the unwavering belief that the future will mirror the stability of the present. Such confidence, however, is inherently fragile, and when it shatters, the entire edifice crumbles in unison. Visualize it as a colossal dam. For years, imperceptible fissures develop and water begins to seep through. Engineers may identify these issues, but they often reassure that the situation is manageable. The dam continues to stand. Those residing in its shadow carry on with their lives, observing the dam daily. It has always been there, and they assume it always will be. Then, one fateful day, a pre-existing crack widens, the water pressure intensifies, and without warning, the entire structure succumbs. It does not fail gradually. It collapses all at once. The water does not incrementally rise. It becomes a destructive torrent. Those downstream are left with mere minutes, not hours, to react. This is the essence of imperial collapse. The empire functions as the dam, while the accumulating pressures, mounting debt, overextended military commitments, debased currency, and societal decay represent the forces straining its integrity. Cracks have been forming for an extended duration, but the dam holds firm until it inevitably gives way. And when that happens, it is an all-encompassing catastrophe. Let us examine how this phenomenon unfolds in reality. We will bypass the protracted periods of decline and focus solely on the collapse itself, the precise juncture where apparent stability dissolves. We will scrutinize 3 distinct empires during their terminal phases. Rome in 410 Anno Domini, France in 1940, and the Soviet Union in 1991. Our focus will not be on their entire histories, but exclusively on their collapse phases, their final moments. For it is only by understanding the nature of their end that we can recognize it when it befalls us. Rome, 410 Anno Domini. By the latter part of the 4th century, Rome was undeniably in decline. This was a widely acknowledged reality. Barbarian incursions along its borders were increasing, its military strength was waning, and its currency had been devalued. Nevertheless, Rome remained Rome. The city itself had never experienced a conquest, a remarkable feat sustained over 800 years. Romans harbored an unshakable belief in their city's eternal destiny, divinely protected and utterly invincible. In 408 Anno Domini, Alaric, the Visigoth leader, along with his army, laid siege to Rome. He levied demands for tribute, specifically gold, silver, and provisions. Rome complied, and Alaric withdrew. The crisis was averted. The city was spared. In 409, Alaric returned, escalating his demands. Once again, Rome capitulated. Another crisis averted. However, Rome's treasury was rapidly depleting. They could no longer sustain such payments. Alaric was acutely aware of this predicament. On August 24th, 410 Anno Domini, Alaric's forces entered Rome. Their entry was not achieved through military conquest, but through treachery. Slaves within the city's walls opened the gates. The Visigoths poured in, and for 3 days they engaged in widespread looting. Temples were stripped of their precious metals. Members of the aristocracy were either ransomed or brutally murdered. Ordinary citizens fled with whatever they could carry. The city, which had stood for 8 centuries, was consumed by flames. When Alaric departed, Rome was reduced to a mere shell of its former glory. The sack of Rome was not primarily a military defeat. The Roman legions were not even present to defend it. They were dispersed across the vast empire, engaged in combating other threats. The city fell not due to military inferiority, but because Rome could no longer afford to pay its defenders, nor could it appease the encroaching barbarians, nor maintain its complex systems. Once the ingrained perception of invincibility was shattered, the empire's demise became inevitable. No one genuinely believed such an event could occur until it irrevocably did. The collapse itself spanned 3 days, but its psychological impact reverberated eternally. For once Rome capitulated, every other dominion within the empire recognized that if their capital could fall, then nothing was truly secure. Within a mere 66 years, the Western Roman Empire had vanished. Consider the lived experience of those who endured this cataclysm. If you were a Roman citizen in 410, your life was collapsing in real time. Your currency had become worthless. The denarius you had painstakingly saved was debased to near nothingness. Your property held no value. Who would purchase real estate in a burning city? Your social standing offered no protection. Aristocrats were being held for ransom or slain. Your government was incapable of safeguarding you. The legions were absent. You were confronted with 3 stark choices: remain and hope for survival, flee and become a refugee, or collaborate with the Visigoths and plead for leniency. This is the true visage of collapse, not a gradual decline, but a sudden descent into chaos where every pillar of your trust implodes simultaneously. France, 1940. By 1939, the imminence of war was palpable. Germany was rearming, and Hitler's aggressive posture was undeniable. Yet France remained outwardly confident, bolstered by the formidable Maginot Line and its army, then considered the most powerful in Europe, as well as its alliance with Britain. They had triumphed over Germany in the First World War and felt assured of a repeat victory. On May 10, 1940, Germany initiated its invasion not by breaching the Maginot Line, but by advancing through Belgium and the Ardennes forest. French military doctrine had erroneously concluded that tanks could not navigate such terrain. They were profoundly mistaken. Within a week, German panzers had shattered French defenses, causing them to collapse entirely. The British Expeditionary Force found itself cornered at Dunkirk. By June 10th, the French government had abandoned Paris. On June 14th, German troops entered the French capital unopposed. By June 22nd, France formally surrendered. A mere 6 weeks from the initial invasion to the final capitulation. 6 weeks. The continent's most formidable military did not merely lose, it disintegrated. French soldiers deserted their posts, officers fled, and entire divisions surrendered without offering any resistance. The government that had presided over an empire devolved into a puppet regime headquartered in Vichy. French citizens watched their world disintegrate before their very eyes. This was the on-the-ground reality. If you were French in June 1940, every aspect of your existence imploded concurrently. The military was incapable of defending you, the government had fled, abandoning its populace. Millions of refugees clogged the roadways, desperately fleeing southward with nowhere to go. German soldiers occupied Paris. Your savings were rendered worthless as the French economy now fell under German control. Your property was vulnerable to confiscation and your freedom was extinguished. France transitioned from a global superpower to occupied territory in just 6 weeks. The French populace struggled to comprehend this sudden transformation. They had genuinely believed their nation was invincible right up until the moment it demonstrably was not. The psychological shock was devastating because when an empire falls, it is not merely the governmental structure that collapses, it is the entire worldview of its citizens that shatters. Every deeply held belief about your country, your security, and your future evaporates. And this happens with such breathtaking speed that adaptation becomes impossible. Soviet Union, 1991. By 1989, the Soviet Union's profound difficulties were widely recognized. Its economy was faltering, and Eastern European nations were exhibiting increasing restiveness. Nevertheless, the Soviet Union persisted as a superpower, possessing a vast nuclear arsenal, a formidable military, and a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. It had been one of the two dominant global powers for 45 years. The prevailing assumption was that it would endure indefinitely. Even as its challenges mounted, no one anticipated its complete disintegration. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, signaling the collapse of East Germany. The Soviet government refrained from intervening, lacking the resources to do so. Over the subsequent year, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Romania all seceded. The Soviet Empire was visibly fracturing, yet the Soviet Union itself, the core entity, still existed, comprising Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Central Asian republics. It was believed that this core would remain intact. It had to. It did not. In August 1991, hardline communists staged a coup, aiming to reassert Soviet authority. The coup failed, not due to the intervention of the Soviet military, but because soldiers refused to fire upon civilians. The very military that had held the Soviet Union together no longer adhered to orders. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, effectively assumed leadership. Gorbachev, the nominal president of the Soviet Union, became irrelevant. By December 1991, the Soviet republics began declaring their independence in rapid succession. Ukraine proclaimed its sovereignty, followed by Belarus and Kazakhstan. By December 25th, Gorbachev resigned. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. A span of 900 days, from the fall of the Berlin Wall to its ultimate dissolution. A superpower with 30,000 nuclear weapons vanished, not through warfare, but due to economic collapse, a profound loss of confidence, and the stark realization that the system was no longer sustainable. This was the experience of Soviet citizens. Their country simply disappeared. The government under which they had lived for 70 years was gone. Their currency, the ruble, became worthless, precipitating immediate hyperinflation. Savings evaporated, and pensions became meaningless. The system that had guaranteed employment, housing, and sustenance dissolved. Factories shuttered, unemployment surged, and crime rates skyrocketed as the state proved incapable of compensating its police force. The military also faced non-payment, leading some soldiers to sell their weapons for survival. Certain regions devolved into regions controlled by warlords. If you were a Soviet citizen in 1991, Your world ended, and it happened in less than 3 years, from superpower status to a failed state, with such astonishing speed. 3 empires, 3 collapses: Rome, France, the Soviet Union. Each believed it was immune to such a fate. Each was tragically mistaken, and each collapse followed a remarkably consistent sequence. Allow me to outline the 6 phases, for once you grasp this pattern, you will recognize it when it begins to manifest, and it is beginning to happen now. Phase 1. The denial. The empire is undeniably in decline. Debt levels are astronomical, military commitments are overextended, the currency is being debased, and societal problems are escalating. Yet, the government, the media, and the ruling elite adamantly assert that everything is under control. They claim they have overcome greater challenges in the past, that recovery is imminent, and that these are merely temporary setbacks. They maintain that they remain the preeminent global power. Citizens, eager to believe this narrative, readily accept it, choosing to disregard the warning signs and place their trust in the existing system as the alternative. The collapse of their empire is too terrifying to contemplate. Rome endured this denial for 60 years, from 350 Anno Domini to 410 Anno Domini, a period of prolonged decline where pronouncements of manageability persisted. France exhibited denial for 20 years, from 1919 to 1940, maintaining the facade of superpower status. The Soviet Union's denial spanned 19 years, from 1970 to 1989, a persistent insistence on the inevitable triumph of communism. The denial phase persists until reality becomes inescapable. Once that occurs, the collapse accelerates dramatically. Phase 2. The credibility break. This is the critical juncture where the empire's reputation is irrevocably shattered. It is marked by a military defeat that should not have occurred, an economic crisis that exposes the currency's worthlessness, or a political upheaval that demonstrates the government's utter lack of control. For Rome, this pivotal moment was the Battle of Adrianople in 378 Anno Domini. The legions once considered invincible were annihilated, and the emperor himself perished. Rome's military prestige was decimated. For France, it was the fall of Paris in 1940. The continent's most powerful army collapsed within a mere 6 weeks. For the Soviet Union, it was the protracted and ultimately futile war in Afghanistan. 10 years of conflict culminating in defeat, where the supposedly invincible Red Army was vanquished by a ragtag force of farmers armed with rifles. The credibility break signifies the moment when allies, adversaries, and domestic populations alike realize the empire is fundamentally hollow, that its vaunted reputation was merely a veneer concealing pervasive decay. Once credibility is broken, it can never be restored. Phase 3. The cascade. Following the credibility break, a rapid, interconnected disintegration ensues. Allies, no longer trusting the empire's guarantees, begin to forge alliances with its rivals and cease to offer support. Enemies seize the opportunity, testing the empire's boundaries with impunity, discovering a distinct lack of consequences. The currency plummets in value, hyperinflation accelerates, and foreign holders divest their assets. The domestic population loses faith, and the government forfeits its ability to control the narrative. Societal cohesion disintegrates, giving rise to protests, riots, and rampant crime as citizens recognize the government's inability to protect them. This phase is particularly terrifying due to its non-linear progression. The collapse accelerates exponentially. Rome's cascade spanned 66 years, from 410 to 476 Anno Domini, a period of relentless disintegration. France's cascade was remarkably swift, occurring over 4 weeks in June 1940, from invasion to surrender. The Soviet Union's cascade unfolded over 900 days, from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 to its dissolution in 1991. Each collapse in succession was faster than the last, a consequence of accelerated information dissemination and increasingly interconnected modern systems. Once confidence is eroded, there is virtually no opportunity for recovery. Phase 4. Fragmentation. The empire begins to break apart. Regions assert their independence, Provinces cease remitting tax revenue, and military units defy orders or defect. The central government gradually loses all semblance of control. For Rome, its provinces transformed into independent kingdoms, Gaul, Spain, North Africa, all detached. The Roman Empire's territory contracted to encompass only Italy, which eventually succumbed as well. For France, fragmentation was immediate. Its overseas colonies in Africa and Asia initiated independence movements, which the French government was powerless to suppress. For the Soviet Union, its constituent republics departed en masse. Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, Central Asia, all seceded. The Soviet Union dwindled from 15 republics to none in a matter of months. Fragmentation becomes inevitable because the empire can no longer afford to maintain its territorial integrity. Its military cannot be adequately compensated, its bureaucracy ceases to function effectively, and individual regions conclude that they are better off independent. Phase 5. Freefall. This represents the most dire phase. The currency collapses entirely, leading to either hyperinflation or deflation, rendering money virtually worthless. The economy grinds to a halt, supply chains are severed, and food shortages become prevalent. Energy supplies become unreliable. The government loses all legitimacy, and citizens largely cease obeying laws. Crime rates explode, and in some regions, warlords or militias assume control. The state is utterly incapable of maintaining public order. For Rome, this period extended from 450 to 476 Anno Domini, characterized by widespread starvation, relentless barbarian raids, and the complete absence of a functioning government. For France, this phase encompassed 1940 to 1944, marked by occupation, collaboration, resistance, and pervasive chaos. For the Soviet Union, it spanned 1991 to 1998, witnessing hyperinflation, economic devastation, the rise of criminal syndicates, and the emergence of regional warlords. The freefall phase inflicts the most severe hardship on ordinary citizens, as the essential systems they relied upon, currency, law, and supply chains, fail, forcing them to navigate survival within a collapsed state. Phase 6. The reset. Eventually, a new order emerges. This may manifest as a new governmental structure, foreign occupation, or the fragmentation into smaller, independent states. However, the old empire is definitively defunct. Whatever replaces it will be fundamentally different. For Rome, the reset was the emergence of the medieval kingdoms that succeeded the empire. For France, the reset involved liberation by the Allied forces and its subsequent redefinition as a secondary global power. For the Soviet Union, the reset resulted in the formation of Russia and 14 independent republics. The reset is not a restoration of the former system, it is the establishment of an entirely new reality, and the individuals who once resided within the empire are compelled to adapt to a world where their nation no longer exists. 6 phases in total: denial, credibility, break, cascade, fragmentation, freefall, and reset. Every empire that succumbs to collapse experiences these stages, and the United States is presently entering Phase 2. Let me illustrate our current position. Phase 1, denial, has concluded. We have been mired in denial for approximately 20 years, encompassing the 1998 financial crisis, the protracted wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the unprecedented monetary expansion during the COVID-19 pandemic, the accumulation of massive national debt, and widespread political dysfunction. Despite these accumulating issues, the government, media, and elite consistently maintained that the situation was under control, emphasizing America's enduring economic and military strength and the dollar's stability, urging faith in the system. This era of denial is drawing to a close as an increasing number of people are now recognizing the underlying cracks. Phase 2, the credibility break, is commencing. The withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 served as a significant credibility break. After 20 years and $2 trillion involving the world's most advanced military, the United States experienced defeat. The Taliban seized control within 11 days, and our Afghan allies were abandoned. The chaotic scenes at Kabul airport, including Afghans falling from aircraft and the tragic deaths of 13 American service members underscored the withdrawal's disastrous nature. The world watched, including China, Russia, and Iran, and they perceived weakness. This represents a credibility break, the moment when an empire's reputation dissolves and its underlying vulnerabilities are exposed. However, this is not the sole credibility break unfolding. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is eroding. In 2000, dollars constituted 73% of global reserves. Today, that figure stands at 58% and is declining. Nations like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS, are actively developing alternative payment systems. China and Russia are increasingly conducting trade in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar. Saudi Arabia has begun accepting yuan for oil transactions. This constitutes a significant credibility break for the US dollar. Furthermore, the United States is failing to meet its military recruitment targets by a substantial 25%, necessitating a lowering of standards and contributing to declining readiness. The US Navy currently operates 290 ships, while China possesses over 350. The Air Force is operating its oldest fleet in history, with aging equipment and modernization efforts falling behind schedule. This signifies a credibility break for the US military. Trust in American institutions has plummeted to historic lows. Congress garners a mere 20% approval rating, the Supreme Court is perceived as overtly partisan, the media is widely distrusted, and elections are frequently contested. These developments collectively indicate we are at the precipice of Phase 2, and if historical precedent is any guide, Phase 3, the cascade, will follow, and it will likely unfold with astonishing speed. Let me illustrate what the cascade might entail for the United States, as once it begins, it accelerates exponentially. By the time individuals comprehend its unfolding, it will be too late to avert. The cascade is typically initiated by a triggering event. This could manifest as a currency crisis, a significant military defeat, a default on national debt, or a profound political upheaval. Whatever the catalyst, it will expose the inherent fragility of our systems, leading to a swift collapse of confidence. Consider one plausible scenario. China initiates military action against Taiwan. The United States has publicly committed to defending Taiwan, and our entire strategic posture in Asia hinges on this commitment. However, military wargame simulations consistently indicate a US defeat, not necessarily due to Chinese military superiority, but because we would be unable to deploy sufficient forces rapidly enough, and China possesses the capability to sink our aircraft carriers with hypersonic missiles against which we have no effective defense. Our supply lines are too extensive and vulnerable. If China invades Taiwan and the US fails to repel the invasion, this would represent a critical credibility break that triggers the cascade. Our allies in Asia, including Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, would conclude that American security guarantees are no longer reliable and would begin negotiating separate agreements with China. Our military dominance in the Pacific would evaporate, and our technological edge, heavily reliant on Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing, would be compromised. The dollar, historically underpinned by American military might, would rapidly lose its reserve currency status. Foreign holders would divest their dollar holdings en masse, leading to a dramatic currency devaluation and soaring inflation. Alternatively, consider a debt crisis scenario. The United States currently owes $36 trillion, with annual interest payments exceeding $1 trillion, a sum greater than our defense budget. This debt continues to escalate relentlessly. At some point, the global bond markets will lose confidence in our ability to repay, demanding significantly higher interest rates for lending to the U.S. Treasury. This spike in interest rates would force the government into an impossible choice: default on its debt obligations, print money to meet its obligations, thereby triggering hyperinflation, or implement such draconian spending cuts that the economy collapses. Each of these options carries catastrophic consequences. A U.S. default would immediately result in the dollar's dethronement as the reserve currency. Printing money would obliterate savings and purchasing power through hyperinflation. Drastic spending cuts would precipitate an economic collapse and a surge in unemployment. Any of these outcomes would initiate the cascade. Consider a third potential outcome: a governmental upheaval. The presidential election scheduled for the year 2024 becomes disputed. Each political faction proclaims victory. Neither side acquiesces to the election results. Various states decline to formally ratify the outcome. The Supreme Court finds itself in an impasse. Demonstrations escalate into widespread unrest. The armed forces are called upon to restore order. Some military detachments comply, others decline. The national government begins to fragment. And when governing bodies lose their capacity to maintain public order, the downward spiral commences. Regions begin to disregard federal directives. Individual states forge their own international trade agreements. The US dollar rapidly loses its value because public confidence in the issuing government evaporates. The global dominion of the United States disintegrates in real time. I am not asserting which of these scenarios will unfold. I am illustrating that numerous pathways can lead to this cascading collapse, and once it begins, it invariably follows the identical progression observed in every fallen empire. Allies distance themselves from us. Adversaries act without hesitation. The national currency plummets. Societal stability disintegrates, and the grand dominion fragments. How swiftly does this transpire? The collapse of the Roman Empire unfolded over 66 years. The French Empire's demise took just 4 weeks. The dissolution of the Soviet Union spanned 900 days. For the United States, this process will be significantly more rapid than that of the Soviet Union. This is due to the instantaneous transmission of information in the present era. It is also attributable to the highly interconnected nature of global financial markets. Furthermore, once public trust erodes, there is virtually no opportunity for remedial action. I would estimate that the entire cascade, from its inception to the point of fragmentation, would take approximately 18 to 36 months. That is the time frame from the initial trigger event until the United States, as we currently comprehend it, ceases to exist. Allow me to depict what this would manifest as on the ground, what you might personally experience if you were to live through the unraveling of the American system. Initially, a monetary crisis. The dollar's value diminishes at an alarming rate. Inflation that was previously at 5% would surge to 20%, then 50%, and subsequently into triple digits. Your accumulated savings would lose half their worth within a single year. Prices would double every few months. Gasoline prices would skyrocket from $4 a gallon to $20. Groceries that once cost $100 would now demand $500. Your earnings, assuming you still possess employment, would be insufficient to keep pace. You would find yourself progressively impoverished each month with no recourse. Imported goods would become prohibitively expensive. Electronics, pharmaceuticals, and any item requiring international transport would transform into luxury articles. Supply chains would rupture. Retail establishments would exhaust their inventories. Scarcity of essential goods would become commonplace. You would be unable to procure basic necessities, not due to their non-existence, but because the logistical infrastructure would have collapsed. Secondly, the breakdown of social order. Governmental agencies would be unable to fund law enforcement personnel. Criminal activity would surge. Acts of theft, robbery, vehicle appropriation, and home invasions would become rampant. Your personal safety, even within your own residence, would be compromised. Private security forces would become a necessity for the affluent. All others would be left to fend for themselves. Public demonstrations and riots would occur with increasing frequency. The populace would be consumed by anger, fear, and desperation. Urban centers would transform into perilous environments. Some individuals would seek refuge in rural locales. Others would fortify their homes. Public faith in established institutions would be utterly extinguished. Governmental pronouncements would be made, but no one would lend them credence. Legislation would be enacted, yet its observance would be non-existent. The fundamental societal agreement would be irrevocably fractured. Thirdly, regional secession. Individual states would begin to disregard federal authority. California might initiate trade negotiations directly with China. Texas could seriously consider declaring its independence. Regions would recognize their diminished reliance on Washington, D.C., and Washington would lack the capacity to enforce any mandate, as the federal government would be financially insolvent. Military installations would face closure. Troops would be recalled to the homeland due to the inability to sustain their operational readiness. The nation's global reach would contract to its territorial core, and even that core would commence to fragment. Fourthly, the economic collapse. Unemployment rates would soar, businesses would cease operations, financial institutions would fail. Your retirement savings, held in 401k plans, would become worthless. Your pension would vanish. The real estate market would experience a catastrophic decline as purchasing homes would become impossible. The stock market would crash. Anyone whose wealth was denominated in US dollars would be utterly divested. The sole survivors would be those possessing tangible assets or holdings with intrinsic value, such as real estate, raw materials, foreign currencies, or precious metals. However, the majority of Americans hold their assets exclusively in dollars, and when the dollar disintegrates, they will be entirely ruined. Fifth, the survival phase. Your concerns would no longer revolve around political discourse or governmental policy. Your focus would shift to securing sustenance, potable water, and personal safety. Could you adequately protect your family? Do you possess sufficient provisions? Do you have a supportive community? This is because the systems upon which you previously depended would no longer function. You would be entirely on your own. This is the depiction of collapse. Not a gradual deterioration, but a swift, violent, and chaotic disintegration. And it unfolds with a speed that surpasses one's ability to fully comprehend. Now the pivotal question arises: can this trajectory be averted? Can the United States circumvent this cascading collapse? Technically, yes. Practically, no. To prevent such a cascade, the United States would need to undertake actions never before witnessed in a declining empire. We would need to acknowledge the problem. We would need to accept that we are experiencing decline, that our global influence has waned, and that our current imperial structure is unsustainable. No empire has ever achieved such self-awareness. This is because acknowledging decline precipitates an even more rapid loss of power. Allies would immediately adjust their strategies. Adversaries would seize the opportunity to strike. For an empire, admitting vulnerability is tantamount to self-destruction. We would need to implement drastic reductions in military expenditures. This would involve closing overseas bases, ceasing international commitments, and withdrawing from our global commitments. However, we can no longer effectively police the world, yet such a withdrawal would be perceived as a definitive defeat, and no superpower willingly accepts the appearance of weakness. We would need to address our national debt, which necessitates either substantial government spending cuts or significant tax increases. Both options present insurmountable political obstacles. Reducing government expenditure would cripple the economy. Raising taxes would trigger a massive outflow of capital. There is no straightforward solution. We would need to revitalize our domestic manufacturing sector, repatriate supply chains, and restore our industrial production capacity. This process would require decades. We do not possess that much time. We would need to foster a restoration of social unity, rectify political paralysis, and rebuild public trust in our institutions. No one possesses a clear roadmap for achieving this. The nation is far too polarized. Therefore, in practical terms, we cannot halt the cascade because doing so demands an embrace of reality and the execution of difficult choices that no one is willing to confront. And by the time a crisis compels these decisions, it will be too late. The cascade will have already commenced its relentless progression. Here is what you should grasp. This discussion transcends partisan politics. It is neither about the left nor the right, Republicans nor Democrats. This is a matter of arithmetic. Empires that expend beyond their financial means inevitably collapse. Empires that devalue their currency invariably disintegrate. Empires that overextend themselves militarily are destined to fall. The United States has engaged in all three of these practices. The pattern is firmly established. The question is not if this will occur, but when. And when it does, its arrival will be precipitous. It will be swifter than the decline of Rome, faster than the collapse of France, and more rapid than the disintegration of the Soviet Union. This is because contemporary systems are susceptible to more rapid failure. This is due to the accelerated pace of global financial markets, and because public confidence can evaporate in mere hours, not over years. You are living through the twilight of the American empire. Most individuals have yet to fully grasp this reality. They believe this is a temporary phase. They anticipate a recovery. They hold an unwavering conviction in America's eternal strength. However, empires are not eternal. They all eventually conclude. And the United States is approaching its end at this very moment. The indicators are omnipresent. The instances of credibility erosion are occurring. The initial stages of the cascade are unfolding, and within the coming decade, the United States, as you know it, will cease to exist. This will not be due to warfare or invasion, but as a consequence of economic devastation. This will occur because we have followed the identical trajectory as every failed empire before us, and our financial limitations have finally caught up. If this analysis has altered your perception of impending events, I encourage you to subscribe, because when the cascade accelerates and when the collapse becomes undeniably evident, you will wish to comprehend what is transpiring and the underlying reasons for it. The historical record provides a clear pattern. This collapse has been witnessed 3 times previously, and it is presently manifesting again. The sole uncertainty is whether you will foresee its arrival or whether you will find yourself in a similar predicament to the Romans in 409 AD, the French in May of 1940, or the Soviets in 1988, all of whom believed that all was well, right up until the moment it demonstrably was not. History holds the answers, and the historical evidence unequivocally indicates that the cascade has begun.